I've just like seen a creature or something in the woods.
Hey everyone, Night here. Camping in the woods can be a very eerie feeling. Being in the pitch black with nothing protecting you besides a thin tent wall. There can be anything on the other side. I have included a video that was recently discovered by a hiker. I can tell you that it is extremely creepy, but you will have to wait until the end to see it. Now on with these stories. Enjoy. When I was 18, me and some friends took a road trip about 7 hours down to the Apalachicola National Forest near Tallahassee, Florida. We were going to do a little car camping, drink a few ice-cold natty lights, 18-year-old stuff. As such, we didn't want to be bothered by any park rangers, so we drove way deep into the woods. We got there, set up camp, and had some natty lights. Me and this guy decided to do a little exploring. So we walked about 100 yards from our site back to the main road. We saw another path directly across from us and started walking. Immediately, we started seeing signs that someone had lived there for a while. Big bags of trash, stuff like that. It should have been a huge red flag to turn around, but 18, nothing can hurt us. So we get to the campsite of an older white guy living out of his van. Clotheslines strung up, coolers placed all around, and a big gorgeous dog. I think maybe a golden retriever. We tried to back out, but he sees us and starts talking. He's friendly enough, asks us where we're from, tells us about some cool spots to check out in the park, and we end up chatting for about 10 minutes and go on our way. I keep thinking to myself how odd it was that he gave us directions in steps, not yards or miles. The guy seemed to be off balance. Not stumbling drunk, but like he was walking on a balance beam, swaying side to side. Oh, and he was super excited to talk about the national park and forest that we were from. So our camping trip was over. Fast forward 2 months, my same buddy calls me late at night and tells me to turn on the TV to the news. I oblige. I see an old dude with a van, and then I see the golden retriever and all clicks. What the hell? That man's name was Gary Michael Hilton, convicted of at least 4 murders. He kidnapped and murdered a girl on Blood Mountain, Georgia, and an older couple in North Carolina, and a girl in Apalachicola at that campsite not long after we left. Yes, the very same place he had been talking to us about. I'm an archaeologist. A few years back, we were doing a massive survey in the middle of nowhere in interior British Columbia. All of the crew had gone home, and it was just my boss and myself left for a few days to follow up and confirm some coordinates and finish some mapping. We head out from the motel an hour or so into the bush. We were in the middle of nowhere along the deactivated logging roads. The closest town is miles and miles away. We hike out to this one area we had found a site a few weeks previously. For some reason, the whole area just felt off. So we get down to business, and about 15 minutes after being hunched over mapping, there was this weird deafening whomp sound. Like I could feel pressure in my ears. I immediately looked at my boss, about 20 feet away, and he is white as a ghost staring back at me. It happens again. The ear pressure and chest pressure, like I was just squeezed. I had chills all over my body and every hair standing on end. My boss just looks at me and says, "Let's go." We grab all of our shit and speed hike back to the truck. We never discussed it. No clue what it was, but I have never been so freaked out in my life. 10 years later, I still get the chills. There have been a lot of theories and sounds, but nothing like it. The best I can describe, when a large bird or an eagle takes flight, that initial whoosh, whomp sound of the wings pumping in the air, kind of like that. Lately, my mind has been wandering back to my first camping experience. This event is the source of such fear and dread that thinking about it even 20 years later is sending shivers up and down my spine. However, I feel by writing this incident down, I can put that night behind me and finally put this harrowing encounter to bed. I lived a sheltered life as a child. I attended Christian school and went to church 3 days a week, sometimes even more. My father was a pastor, and when I developed an interest in doing outdoorsy type stuff, I asked if I could join the Boy Scouts. My dad in turn suggested I join the Cadets. This is an organization that is like the Boy Scouts, but with a more explicitly Christian bend to it. I agreed, and he registered me the next day. I like attending meetings for the Cadets. I quickly made friends with everyone there. It seemed like I had joined at a very opportune time, since the big overnight camping trip to the Bong recreational area in Kenosha, Wisconsin was only 3 weeks away. To say I was excited would be a gross understatement. I had never been camping before and had always wanted to go. I convinced my father to join me and spent the next 3 weeks up all night with anticipation coursing through me. The day of the big trip arrived. I rode in my car with my father. A smile beamed across my 9-year-old face the entire way. We arrived around 4 p.m. We set up our tent and our sleeping bags. This was followed by an extended nature hike. Initially, I was having a great time. I remember I caught my first wild animal, a frog, even though I was disappointed when my father would not let me keep it as a pet and made me release it back into the woods. I was still very proud of this accomplishment. The ranger who was guiding our troop across a rundown shack. This shack was ancient and decrepit. It must have been abandoned for at least the better part of a century, maybe even more. A chair rocked ominously on the tiny front porch as the wind played with it. He told us to remember the hovel, because it was the home of the Batners. This was allowed by a lot of oohs and ahs. This name meant nothing to me, but I was genuinely intrigued that a family had lived in such a tiny shanty. Around 6 p.m., it began to get dark. I fell a little bit behind my father and the rest of the troop. With the cold wind blowing through the October air, I began to look at the branches of the barren and gnarled trees as they swayed. I surveyed my surroundings and soaked in the eerie silence that accompanied it. I became a little frightened. There was something unmistakably creepy about these woods. When the wind through the trees began to resemble a whisper, I quickened my step as night began to overtake the woods in an impenetrable black shroud. We cooked hot dogs for dinner at the campsite. This was followed by one of the things I was most looking forward to, making s'mores around the campfire. As we began to eat, the ranger that had served as our guide gathered everyone's attention. He told us that he was now going to tell the tale of the Batners. I'm going to write what he said as best as I can remember it. Back in the late 1930s, the area you are now sitting in was supposedly converted into an airbase. Bulldozers and the like were ready to begin demolition on the forest to make way for it. However, there was one major problem. The Batners would not leave. The Batners were a family that occupied the small shanty that we passed on the trail. They lived a completely isolated existence. The family consisted of Grandma Batner, who did nothing more than rock in her chair on the front porch. There was Grandpa Batner. He was an old man who was missing all of his teeth. A black patch covered the hole where his right eye used to be. Their son Roy and his 2 children, Jenny Mae and Roy Jr., also lived in the tiny house. There had been a fair number of disappearances in the woods surrounding that shack, and this led to rumors spreading about the family in the community. The most widespread being that they were cannibals. They would lure the lost hikers under the premise of down-home hospitality and butcher them. They would feast upon their flesh. The most disturbing rumor was that they would grind the meat down into a slurry so that the toothless Grandpa Bartner could participate in the feeding. In any case, the government needed them to vacate their property in order to begin work on the runway. They, of course, refused to move. This continued for years. As the US joined World War II, the push to build an airbase became that much greater. They were offered a tidy sum to move on. Despite all the economic pressure, the Batners refused to budge. As 1945 rolled around, they were still stubbornly refusing to leave their property. One day, government agents descended upon their shanty in one last push to get them to leave. They were shocked to find all the members of the family dead. Apparently, They had all taken some kind of poison. Tucked into old man Batners' pocket, below his wide-toothed grin was a note. It read, "You government pigs, you think you have won, but even death itself will not keep us from the land that is rightfully ours. Though our bodies may be removed from this land, we are not going anywhere." Wouldn't you know it, World War II ended shortly after. With everyone looking with optimism toward the post-war future, it was decided that the land would be better served as a recreation area we are now camping on. However, as more people began to camp in the area, the number of disappearances began to skyrocket. Rumblings about strange red lights in the woods began to circulate. Consistently, reports of bright red eyes cutting through the darkness of the woods came from multiple sources. With time, it became common knowledge that the ghosts of the Batners still occupied these very woods, that their hunger for human flesh was now stated by death. They stalked and preyed on campers such as yourselves. Their voices, a whisper in the wind, their red eyes, hypnotic and ravenous for young flesh. The day may belong to us, but make no mistakes, the night belongs to them, the Batners. As soon as he finished the sentence, 2 red lights appeared in the darkness of the trees. The other campers and I shrieked as the light moved slowly but surely towards the fire. I grabbed my father in panic. A feeble scream escaped my lips. The light moved closer. The source was revealed by the light of the fire. One of the troop leaders had sneaked into the trees during the telling of the story. He had a hearty laugh as he showed the 2 laser pointers to us frightened campers. Everyone seemed sufficiently relieved. But the whole episode had frightened me so badly that I did not recover so quickly. As I hinted at before, I lived in an extremely sheltered home with no exposure whatsoever to scary stories. As the rest of the camp settled in for the night, I kept asking my father to reassure me that it was a made-up story, which he did repeatedly. Needless to say, he was furious. Silence settled in as the rest of the campers were sleeping soundly, including my father. I lay awake, thinking I would be incapable of sleeping. Slumber eventually found me. However, the sleep was restless and unfulfilling. I woke up in a daze. It took me a few moments to realize where I was, and quickly after that for the fear to come rushing back. I told myself that it was all just a story over and over again. After my eyes adjusted to the darkness, seeing my father sleeping so peacefully provided me enough comfort to calm down. Then I heard it. The wind blew through the flap of the tent. Carried on the wind was a voice. At first, I told myself I was mistaken. However, the whispering continued. It was barely audible, but there was no denying its existence. Though I could not understand what was being said, the voice was calling to me. Before I knew what I was doing, I opened the flap with hands that no longer belonged to me and stood in front of the tent staring out into the darkness of the woods. That is when a pair of red lights appeared. Scarlet red bobbing up and down through the trees attached to a figure concealed in the darkness. My horror intensified when I saw this figure was not alone. It was being trailed by another pair of bloody red eyes emitting a sinister light that lashed onto something inside, leaving me powerless to react. The eyes were otherworldly and combined with the insistent whispering had me wholly hypnotized, memorized, and frozen in place as the lights marched over closer to the tent. Then a third pair of eyes materialized, followed by a fourth pursuing a clear-cut path toward me where I was standing. What I felt next snapped me out of it. I screamed at the top of my lungs as the hands grabbed me by the shoulder. It was my father. Try as he might, he was incapable of consoling his hysterical son. He pointed out that no one was in the woods in an attempt to calm me down. It didn't work. I was beside myself with fear. As I sobbed uncontrollably, he quickly packed up our gear. We left immediately. He was livid to say the least. He lodged a formal complaint, and I never went to the other cadets' meetings or stepped foot in the Bong recreation area ever again. Now I can lie to myself about how foolish I was being, that I was just a child and had imagined the whole thing. However, when I tried to rationalize it, I go back to that night and am reminded of what scared me the most. After the fourth set of bright red eyes appeared, another single light, much brighter than the rest, materialized. There was no mistaking it. That eye was trained on me. That single red eye was so bright that it illuminated a toothless grin. The mouth opened, and a cackle escaped his lips. Oh Jesus, that sound. Who am I kidding? Writing this down won't change a thing. I can push everything from that night into the past except that laugh. I can still hear it now. It was a sound so sinister and depraved that it followed me out of the woods that night and will remain with me until my dying day. The video you're about to see is from a hiker that came across a disturbing find. This is the description of the video from the hiker. This is something I stumbled across while hiking in the woods this afternoon. There was like 25 missing person posters taped to the trees, along with some ratty old bedding, a shovel, a large tent, and a collapsed handmade wooden cage surrounding a filled-in hole. I tried to get as many of the posters in frame as I could, but the video was aborted when I heard voices coming from the direction of the adjacent residence. Additionally, he says these particular woods are along the border of a park. It's hard to tell what's going on. This was recorded on the afternoon of October 3rd, 2016 in Suffolk County, New York.
We're deep in the woods. Do you see the fucking trees? Look at the white shit. Okay. I was like, okay, these are probably no trespassing signs, or maybe it's something for the wildlife or something. Look what these fucking are. What the fuck is going on in here? And this isn't like woods I've never been to. Like, I've been here before. I've been here a lot. I've been here so much, I've actually been to the hospital getting stitches because of some of the adventures that I've had. That's beside the point. These are all different fucking people. And they're all just... This is Utah, Florida. They're all different. They're all fucking different. Every single one. This one's from Georgia. And look at this shit. Like, look where the fuck we are. Who the fuck does something like this? Again, just so you guys can see what's up. We have here, this is the fire pit, or whatever that is. That object leaning against the crates is a shovel. Then you got that mysterious tent. There's the houses over there. This blanket. The fucking cage. There was only a couple of these that we didn't see before. Washington, D.C., James Lewis, 67 years old. Collapsed, but you can still tell what it was. Like I said before, look at the shit that somebody would have had to walk through to put these up. What's really crazy is they use plastic tape. Hopefully they left fingerprints.